Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to another video. So in today's video I want to kind of go through one of my current blends that I'm doing, and for those that have been following my channel, I've done a video in the past for a men's fragrance called it's called Autumn Amber, is what it's called right now. So this current formulation that I'm doing now is actually, it's like a sidetracked version. It's probably the one that I may end up going with. If you saw the previous video for the formulation for Autumn Amber, that one got a little bit sidetracked. Not that the scent was bad, but it wasn't hitting the mark of the scent that I was going for. So I did save the formula and I'll probably revisit it for something else, but it just didn't hit the mark for the Autumn Amber that I'm going for, which is a men's fragrance, something slightly sweet. Definitely worn for the fall or autumn time, preferably nighttime men's fragrance. So this new formulation, I'll just go through it real quick. I'm not going to blend it here in front of you. I've actually already done that this morning, and I've done another test sample batch. I've got it on my hand now, and I've been wearing it throughout the day just to get an idea. So I think it's nearly complete, but I'll go through all the different materials that I used, as well as some of the percentages amounts in the formula itself, so you guys get an idea of how I'm using these materials, at what percentages, what the end result is going to smell like, and kind of like what my thought process was when making this fragrance, okay? So as always with all my blends that I've done in the past videos, I laid out all the materials going from base all the way up to the top. And believe it or not, you're probably looking at all these bottles and you're like, well, that's really not a lot of materials. Truth be told, a lot of these are pre-blended bases and accords that I've done. So like this one right here is my Cherry Blossom Accord, and this one bottle has probably 7 to 9 different materials in it that makes up this accord. I have Lily of the Valley Accord that I make up myself that's got maybe 6 or 7 line items. And so a lot of these are pre-made bases or accords. So if I had all these laid out in individual just materials, this table would be filled up. But I like to pre-blend and pre-make accords and store them in little bottles like this, so I don't have to recreate that accord every single time I want to use it in a blend, okay? So we're gonna just talk about what I use going from bottom to top, and my thought processes, why I used it and how much is in this blend. So we're gonna start with the 2 musks that I chose. And with this particular fragrance, because it is a men's fragrance, I didn't want it to be too musky, too powdery, or too animalic. So the 2 musks that I chose, obviously I went with GALAXOLIDE. So I've got GALAXOLIDE here, and my secondary choice was TONALIDE, or sometimes they call it FIXATURE. So in my opinion, GALAXOLIDE is probably the cleanest musk you can possibly get, and you don't really smell GALAXOLIDE. You can feel it in a blend, but you don't necessarily smell it, which is why I piggybacked it with TONALIDE musk, because that one has a more perceivable odor, and it's a more cleaner, it's still a clean profile musk, but it just adds a slight white texture to the base. So I combined GALAXOLIDE with TONALIDE. So GALAXOLIDE in this blend is roughly about 3.6% in the concentrate, and my TONALIDE is roughly 8.4%. So we're looking roughly 12% of this formula is going to be dedicated to just musk, okay? So the next material I then added in was my favorited FIXATURE 505E. I used very, very, very sparingly in this one, not too much, just enough so you don't notice it in a blend, but it does give something in the base, a little bit of lift, but it's really not that noticeable. So with FIXATURE 505E, I've only got it at 0.38% in my concentrate. So the next material I've got in here is another favorite of mine, and this is called Amber Extreme from IFF. I love this material and it suits this blend so well. So it's another one of those super, super high pungent, those woody amber materials that it's either you love it or you hate it, but I love it and it works so good in this. So Amber Extreme, I've got this now at 0.18% in my concentrate. Which then brings me to In the base of the base notes, the one material, or the one accord that's going to do most of the heavy lifting is I pre-made like a very basic amber accord, and I don't mean amber in the sense of ambergris. This is more of like your Oriental style amber, where it's got your labdanum, vanillin, benzoin kind of thing. But I kept it at a very basic level of just those three ingredients, just labdanum, benzoin, and vanillin. And this one I am pretty much trying to keep the base of this overall perfume leaning more towards the amber note, because I wanted the amber note to be a prominent note in this perfume. So with my basic amber accord, I put in a good hefty dose. It's almost, we're looking at 13.5% of the concentrate is just the amber accord. Now moving up the line, I chose another material called OKOUMAL. And OKOUMAL to me is very, very subtle, but it has this distinct aroma that fits the profile of what I'm going for in this perfume. And while it is kind of ambery, it has this semi-sweetness reminiscent of like dried fruits. And the reason why I chose OKOUMAL in this, so OKOUMAL in this formula is at 2%. So to some that may seem like a lot, some people might say that's not enough, but I want it to be more of a supportive role and not so much a scent. So it's at 2% in this formula. And the reason why I chose this is because as we discuss more of the materials towards the heart and the top notes, I'm going for also a boozy scent. So OKOUMAL does have that kind of ambery quality, but the dried fruit nuances plays well with the boozy scent that I'm going to talk about in a little bit as we move up the line. So this helps kind of drag that booziness down to the more towards the base note. The next material I've added in was TREEMOSS. Now Robert Tet makes an excellent tree moss, and this smells different than your traditional oak moss. To me, oak moss is it's very mossy, but it's a dry mossy. Whereas Robert Tet makes tree moss, and this hits the hammer on the nail when it comes to a wet moss, in my opinion. This smells more damp and wet, but I didn't want this to necessarily impart a mossy scent in my base. So I kept this one dosed really low. And so TREEMOSS in this blend is at 1.6% in my concentrate. So now the funny thing is though, when you purchase TREEMOSS from Robert Tet, if you look at the SDS sheet, the majority of what you're purchasing in the bottle is a lot of just, dilutants. You're only actually getting maybe 20% TREEMOSS. So if you buy like a 100 ml bottle, only like 20% of that 100 ml is actual TREEMOSS, the rest is just dilutant. So even though this TREEMOSS that I've added in, so it's at 1.6% in the concentrate, you're actually probably just in trace amounts of what the true TREEMOSS actually is in this. The next material that we're going up the line with, Honey Signature. There's a huge debate on this material on the Base Notes web forum on people wanting to do like a group buy, and it just kind of fell apart. So I found a different supplier and just got my own stash in my own bottles. So Honey Signature on this perfume plays a huge role, because when I think of autumn or fall, I do think of that sweetness and honey. So I wanted to definitely add some of this in here. But you have to dose it low because this is pretty strong. So Honey Signature in this blend is at 0.2% of the concentrate. Next up the line, good old fashioned AMBROXAN. I mean, for a men's fragrance, you just gotta have some. Even if it's in trace amounts or just a little bit, you gotta have some. So I played around with this material trying to find what the right amount was for AMBROXAN in this. And for this blend, I felt a good ground of AMBROXAN was right at about 3.4% of the concentrate is going to be AMBROXAN. Now, of course, you can go higher, like if you want Creed Aventus style AMBROXAN or Dior Sauvage, you go up to like 10%. But in this blend, I don't want to give off that AMBROXAN vibe, but I do want it as a supportive role. to give it a little bit of more, you know, that cleanliness oomph in the base. So 3.4% in my concentrate is AMBROXAN. Now the last one we're going to talk about in the base notes was something I recently just added today, because what I noticed was in the dry down of this fragrance, it did lean a little bit more powdery, and the powderiness wasn't coming from the musks. What I found the powderiness was coming from my Oriental Amber Accord. So vanillin and benzoin, as they dry out, do tend to get a little powdery. But I still wanted, you know, this scent in there. I wanted it to be heavy in that amber. So to kind of try and overshadow that powderiness, but still retain that kind of syrupy sweetness, I went with ISOBUTAVAN. And ISOBUTAVAN is kind of like a vanillic, creamy kind of vibe. It's almost like vanillin, but a more like a lactonic, wet, creamy, non-powdery version of vanillin. So I did a little ISOBUTAVAN, and I've got it only at 0.35% in the concentrate, just to kind of overshadow some of the powderiness you get from the vanillin and benzoin towards the dry down, and that seems to be working pretty good. Okay, so now moving on to some of the middle or the heart notes. ISOE Super. Gotta have ISOE Super, especially in a men's fragrance, in my opinion. So ISOE Super in this blend is, I would say it's pretty high in this. I'm looking at about 29.8% ISOE Super in this formula. So I've seen ISOE Super go as low as maybe 10% in the formula. Ancre Noir from Lalique goes all the way up to like 50% ISOE Super. Some go up to 70% ISOE Super. But I found in this blend, hovering around 30% was the right fit, the right feel. So in this blend that I've got now, I've got 29.8% ISOE Super. Next material we're going to talk about, HEDIONE. So HEDIONE is that typical transparent, generic, white floral. They say it smells like jasmine. In my opinion, it doesn't smell anything like jasmine, but it does have a jasmine-like quality. But I don't want to lean too much on florals in this perfume because it is a men's fall fragrance. But I did find that adding in some HEDIONE did give a nice sense of just a transparent lift in the mids. So a little bit of HEDIONE in this. I'm roughly at 10.5% HEDIONE in this blend. Next material. So when choosing florals for this fragrance, I wanted to lean towards something that matched the Oriental style amber, but still didn't necessarily smell too floral-like. So I've always had this cherry blossom accord that I made up, and this one kind of mimics Bath and Body Works is notorious for their cherry blossom lotions or cherry blossom perfumes and scents. So I bought some of those products and kind of mimicked my own cherry blossom floral kind of accord. So that's what I did in this fragrance, and it gives it that slightly sweet, slightly nutty, slightly vanillic, but not necessarily floral. It's kind of like almost like a lilac in a sense. But I've got this dose pretty low, so we're at 2.35% of cherry blossom in this blend. Another floral I added just to give it a little bit of freshness. I wanted to add some rose, but with all the roses that I have, I didn't know what was the appropriate one because I wanted this to be a men's fragrance. I chose to do, IFF has a new, well, it's not necessarily new, it came out in 2017 or 2014. It's called Rose Ultimate Extract, and I talked about it in one of my previous videos. So this is more of a take on a dirty rose. You do pick up these tobacco dirty nuances from it. So I like this in this blend because you do get that rose, fresh, petal-like kind of softness, but it does have an undertone of this dirty tobacco-ness, which suits the men's, fall profile pretty well. So Rose Ultimate Extract, which is a natural, I've got this one at exactly 1% in my blend is Rose Ultimate Extract. Now the last of the florals, I wanted to impart some freshness. without it smelling too floral, still within the men's realm of things. So it doesn't get any more classic than, you know, your Lily of the Valley scent, which is in my opinion, the ultimate fresh floral scent that can lean both masculine and feminine. So this one, I've got my own pre-made Lily of the Valley accord that I've made based off of a whole bunch of aroma chemicals. So this guy, I've got 3.5% in my concentrate. So looking at the florals, so we're looking at, see, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're looking at about 7% total of my concentrate is dedicated to florals, and that's excluding HEDIONE, of course. I don't consider HEDIONE really a floral. Okay, so moving along past the florals, the one thing that I also wanted to impart in this was a little bit of spiciness. Not a lot of spiciness in a sense of Viktor and Rolf's like Spice Bomb spicy, but I wanted to give it just a little bit of spice, so when you smell it, you can be like, yes, I smell some spiciness, and it does remind me of autumn or fall. So I didn't know what kind of spices to do, so as a starting point, I actually used Perfumer's Apprentice has their own pre-made spice accord, and it's based on, what is it, Valspice, nutmeg, and a couple other things, which kind of fit the bill for me. So, but I have this dosed pretty low. And so this spice accord, we're looking at 0.18% of, no, I'm sorry, in the concentrate, 0.99. So roughly 1% of the concentrate is dedicated for this spice accord. Then to piggyback on some more spices that I did want to add onto it was, you can't really have a classic men's fall fragrance without some sort of cinnamon. So I added some cinnamon, and this was just your basic run-of-the-mill cinnamic aldehyde. It's pre-diluted pretty low. So, but in this one, it's 0.18% in the concentrate is for cinnamic aldehyde. Okay, so now moving up the line here, getting into some ozonic things. Well, actually, no. We're still in the heart or the middle notes, and the one thing you'll probably notice that we didn't really talk much about any woods in the base. So I specifically chose not to do any woods in the base because I wanted to try out a new material that I acquired called KEPHALIS, and this is more it's a heart note kind of wood. So the odor lifespan on this, I think, is roughly 250 hours on a paper strip, which means it's right there in the heart notes. So when it dries out, it doesn't really interfere with the base notes, which I, again, wanted to lean more on the amber, the oriental amber. But I did want some woody facets in this. So I chose KEPHALIS, and it works perfectly because it's got this dry vetiver-like woodiness, and it's not too strong or not too overpowering. So KEPHALIS in this particular blend, in the concentrate, I've got it 3.6%. But it's not very noticeable in the overall blend. It does give it a nuance of some woodiness, but when you smell this, you don't immediately think woody. Let's see, so the last two things we're going to talk about in the heart notes, floral ozone, which is another, it's a middle note in my opinion because the evaporation falls around the 200-hour mark. So I did want to give a little bit of freshness in this perfume because if I add too much density in the base and the mids and not enough freshness, you're just going to smell this and it's just going to smell so thick and dense, which to some people they might like. But I did want to impart some freshness on that, and we'll talk about more of that on some of the top notes as we go further along. So floral ozone is one of those materials for me that is so transparent that even if you slightly overdose it, it never really gets in the way of anything. It just kind of opens things up and it creates this nice airy kind of aura around it without imparting too much of a smell. So floral ozone in this blend, I've got it 0.26% in my concentrate. And the last thing in the heart or the middle notes is I needed just a slight more freshness from the rose ultimate extract. So I pre-diluted pretty heavily Damascone Alpha. And the reason why I chose this one in particular, because you can do Damascone Beta, Alpha, Delta, there's all these different Damascones you can do, but Damascone Alpha to me has that rosy quality, but it also has this kind of, in the undertone, almost like another dried fruit, kind of like a prune dried fruitness, which kind of helps mimic the dried fruit that you get in OKOUMAL. So you can kind of see the theme here, like I'm trying to match certain materials that fit well with some of the other things in the underlying base notes. And so I chose Damascone Alpha. And also, when I talk about some of the boozier notes up above, you know, prunes, dried fruit sometimes comes across as a boozy note in some fragrances. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. So now we're going to get more into the top notes. Top notes that I chose, I've got white grapefruit, just a natural essential oil white grapefruit, and you can, it was a hard decision for me because you can do white, you can do pink, you can do red, but the white one leans more transparent and more, I would say more pungent in the sourness, whereas the pink and the red leans more towards a sweeter side of grapefruit. But I didn't want to go too sweet, I just wanted that grapefruit zest that kind of tickles your nose, that sharpness, and you can really get that pretty well with just white grapefruit. So with white grapefruit, in this blend, I'm at 2% in the concentrate. Okay, so moving up the line here, I did need to add in a little bit of aldehydes to give things some lift. So a citrus aldehyde, you can't go wrong with, you know, C10 DECANAL. And this one I pre-diluted pretty heavily because I don't want to lean too much on too many aldehydes. So your C10 DECANAL in this blend is at 0.04% in the concentrate. So now moving on to another pre-made accord that I did. This is my own apple accord, and it's based off of just very generic things like, you know, manzanate. I think IFF does apple olefactory. Robert's Het makes an apple extract, and I kind of blended all these things together into like my own apple accord. So in my opinion, when you get into the autumn or fall, like to me, apple is like that fruit that just reminds me of fall, like carameled apples, candy apples, Halloween times when you're bobbing for apples. So I wanted to add some apple in the top note in this. So in this blend, I've got my apple accord at 2.2% in the concentrate. Moving up the line here, we've got, this is, I consider like my secret ingredient. It's a material that I bought maybe 6 months ago, and I haven't used it yet. I was just waiting for an opportunity to finally use this, and I love, love, love this. Methyl cyclopentanone. It smells like, if you dilute it further enough, it smells like maple syrup, and it's just so well, not necessarily creamy. It's just when you smell it, it just reminds me of like opening a bottle of, you know, maple syrup that you're about to put on pancakes. And I thought that fit the autumn and fall vibe very well, because when I think of autumn or fall, I think of, you know, like maple trees, sap coming out of, you know, the maple sap coming out of the tree, and what to better fit that kind of odor profile than methyl cyclopentanone. So, but I've got this pre-diluted so low, and I have it dosed so low. It's at 0.02% in the concentrate. So we're talking trace amounts of this, because this stuff is so strong. Next material I'm going to talk about now that's in here, your standalone or your standard methyl pamplemousse. I needed something just to give the white grapefruit just a little bit more edge, just a little bit more tickle in the nose. Methyl pamplemousse, I mean, it goes perfectly hand in hand with any grapefruit kind of material. Methyl pamplemousse in this is at 0.88% in the concentrate. Now this material, this next one here, I went back and forth on so many different trial versions, and my girlfriend actually decided she liked the one trial version that she liked the best was the one highly dosed in PRECYCLEMONE B. And PRECYCLEMONE B, widely used in men's fragrances for just a basic, generic, just overall freshness. It's kind of slightly Lily of the Valley odor profile, which kind of goes with my Lily of the Valley accord that I was using in my middle notes. So PRECYCLEMONE B in this blend is at 1.3% in the concentrate. My original blends, I had it below 1%, but my girlfriend kept leaning towards the one batch that had more PRECYCLEMONE B. She felt it was more balanced with it. So I stuck with her gut judgment, and PRECYCLEMONE B is at 1.3%. Another top note, you can't go wrong with DIHYDRO MERCENOL. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's your typical, what they call the Davidoff cool water top note. It's got that, that fresh, slightly lavender, slightly citrus, perfect for men's fragrances. If you don't know what you want to do in a top note, just throw a little bit of this in there and see how it goes. I added just a little bit. I don't want to go too much, because if I add too much of this, the scent will overall lean more towards fresh, and I don't want that. I just want to balance the freshness with the heavy base in the mids. So with this material here, DIHYDRO MERCENOL, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's at 2.75% of the concentrate. Some more freshness added. I added in some just standard old bergamot essential oil. Because it is IFRA restricted, I just had to, cap it out at that restriction. So bergamot essential oil, I've got at where are we? In the concentrate is at 2%, but IFRA restrictions say in your max perfume you can't go more than 0.4%. So I made sure if I do an EDP concentration on this, this will be IFRA pliant, which it is. So bergamot essential oil, we're at roughly 2% in the concentrate. Now, this next one was a new kind of test blend that a new material that I added in recently, which I kind of fell in love with. And this is what kind of gives it that booziness in the top to mid connection. And it's your standard, you go to Perfumer's Apprentice, and some of their house, their house blends, or their what they call key accords, some are good, some are complete garbage. Their cognac key accord is dead on to Courvoisier cognac. Like, I have a bottle of Courvoisier in my cabinet, and I smelled this versus Courvoisier. I had them side by side. It's a dead on ringer to Courvoisier cognac. So I added it into the blend, and I never looked back, because it adds that slight booziness, which is it's so magical in this perfume style setup. So the cognac accord, it's dosed low. It's at 0.88% of the concentrate, but it's very noticeable. Like, if I pull this out of the blend, you would notice something is missing, and when it's in there, it gives it just that slight booziness that fits so well with a men's fall fragrance kind of theme. Almost done, 4 more materials. So I needed to impart some more freshness to this, but I didn't want to lean towards citruses. I wanted to impart something fruity, and I wasn't quite sure what kind of fruit. And I acquired this material a while back, and I never had a chance to use it. It's cis-3 hexenol I hope I'm pronouncing that. Isovalerate. Cis-3 hexenol isovalerate. And when you smell this in dilution, you actually have to dilute it pretty low to kind of pick up what it's really giving off. It's a cross between apples and blueberries. So I figured this would be a neat thing to try, and I'm glad I did, because it works perfectly in this, because I had my apple accord in there, and I just wanted to give it a little more fruity nuance, but I didn't want it to over lean too much apple. So I was like, well, let me try this and see. A little blueberry kind of tartness would probably mimic or match well with the apple accord, and it does, like a blueberry and apple. But I've got it dosed really low, so most people wouldn't pick up on this scent unless I told them it was in there. So the cis-3 hexenol isovalerate is at 0.4% in the concentrate. It's pretty low. Almost done. So last 3 materials. To also now put in a little bit more spiciness to the overall perfume. So we had our spice accord, we had some cinnamon. I needed something in the top to give it a more mineral kind of spiciness, and I toyed around with pink pepper, and it works, but I had to dose it really low because pink pepper to me is one of those materials where you have to dose it in a certain way or else your entire top is just gonna smell like pink pepper. So in this blend, I've got my pink pepper at 0.28% in the concentrate. The last aldehyde, I went in with this, your classic C12MNA aldehyde. It's a good overall generic aldehyde that's kind of fresh, kind of dry, kind of ambery, and it just kind of fit the overall profile. So I have this though in very small trace amounts. We're looking at 0.04% of C12MNA. And then the last material is something that I just acquired yesterday, and I just tried it in my most recent blend today, and I'm really digging it. And that is yuzu. Now yuzu is like a Japanese citrus, which is a cross between, if you take a mandarin orange, infuse it with lemon, but then have the zesty tart kind of sourness of a grapefruit, gives you yuzu. So I was almost going to not put in yuzu and just up the grapefruit a little bit, or maybe up the methyl pamplemousse, but I was like, no, let me try this. And it worked, and it worked so well, because now you get that kind of zesty bitter sourness of the grapefruit nuance from this yuzu, but now you're also slightly getting that hint of mandarin orange and a little bit of lemon. So it's just a good overall citrus, and it topped everything off beautifully. So yuzu, this one I got from Liberty Natural. They sell yuzu absolute. They call it an absolute, which I thought was weird because I didn't know you can make an absolute from a citrus like a yuzu, but I bought it anyways and it works great. I pre-diluted it. So this guy is at 1% in my concentrate, yuzu. So that's pretty much the entire blend. So what I smell from this, as of right now, like this blend that I just made, I'm gonna let it sit for another 24 hours so I can get a full evaluation. But as I was smelling it today, from the top all the way through the bottom, this reminds me, obviously it's definitely a men's fragrance. It has fall vibes, it's very boozy, it's very ambery. It reminds me of a cross between Dolce & Gabbana's The One, because it does have this grapefruit ambery thing going on, and a cross between that and Paco Rabanne's not Invictus, Paco Rabanne's 1 Million, which is just this thick, sweet, dense, monster of a beast fragrance. And it kind of has both of those nuances, but with the added booziness of cognac and just a little bit more spices that I added into it, it kind of separates it from the rest of the pack of all these men's fragrances to give it something a little bit more unique. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. So this is the current blend of the Autumn Amber. It's been through, I can't even tell you how many trial batches now. I'm probably in 60 plus trial batches, and I think I'm pretty much almost done. Once I let this settle for another 24 hours, I'll make another final sniff evaluation and see where we're at, but in hopes that it's done. And that way, well, thank you guys for watching. So you had an idea of what's in it, what's the actual amounts per ingredients, and what's the vibe it's going to come across. So if you wanted to try and recreate this yourself, you have a baseline of what's in it, what the rough percentages are in the concentrate, and you can play with it that way. So yeah, so that's it for this video, and thank you for watching. So until next time.